The day was ending gently, as though the valley itself were exhaling. Long streaks of orange and violet stretched across the sky, fading slowly into indigo as the sun sank behind the hills. The air was cool and fragrant, carrying the mingled scents of pine, damp earth, and the sweet smoke of distant hearths, where villagers were already preparing their evening meals. Along the winding trail that led toward the river rode a small group of villagers returning from a fair in the next town. Their saddlebags were heavier now, filled with goods they had bartered for, and their hearts were light with the echoes of music, laughter, and the cheerful chaos they had left behind. They spoke easily to one another as they rode, their voices soft against the clatter of hooves on stone and the rustle of leather reins. Some sang snatches of songs from the fair, while others laughed at the playful antics of the younger riders. The horses, though tired, moved with steady rhythm, their coats glistening faintly in the fading light. The riders urged them onward, with the quiet urgency of those who wish to be home before full darkness set in. Lanterns flickered to life in the village behind them, tiny points of gold against the dusk. Ahead lay the river and the bridge, the fastest way back to their homes. The bridge had stood for generations, an old wooden span that arched across the broad, restless river. Its posts and beams had weathered countless seasons of flood and storm. From a distance, in the dying light, it looked solid still, its silhouette dark and unmoving against the shimmering water. But weeks of heavy rains had swollen the current below, pulling and tugging at its foundations with a force that grew stronger each day. The planks were damp, some warped with age, others loosened in their fastenings. Each gust of wind sent a low groan through its joints, a sound too subtle to reach the ears of riders still a half-mile away. None of the villagers noticed. Their minds were on warm suppers, on the comfort of beds after a long day's ride, on the stories they would tell when they reached home. To them, the bridge was merely part of the road, as familiar as the trail itself. But one among them, a bay horse with a keen, restless gaze, felt something different. Its ears flicked forward, nostrils quivering at the scent of damp wood and rushing water. Though no human eye yet saw danger, instinct stirred uneasily in the animal's chest. The evening was calm, the road ordinary, but something ahead pressed against its senses, like a shadow waiting to break. And so, even as the riders laughed and talked, the first tremor of unease had already begun, not in their hearts, but in the heart of a horse, who would soon refuse to carry them forward into what lay waiting. The trail sloped downward, carrying the riders closer to the wide river. The water caught the fading light, glimmering like sheets of molten bronze as it rushed between its banks. The old bridge lay just ahead, its wooden frame dark and hulking against the last glow of the sky. From a distance it seemed as it always had, solid, familiar, a simple crossing between one side of the valley and the other. But as the group drew nearer, one horse faltered. The bay mare, ridden by a young woman named Elira, slowed her pace until she trailed behind the others. At first the change was subtle, a twitch of her ears, a stiffening in her gait, the flick of her tail in restless irritation. Elira clicked her tongue softly, nudging the reins. "Come on, girl," she coaxed, thinking her mount simply tired from the long day's journey. But the horse resisted, planting its hooves firmly into the dirt, neck arching as it let out a low, uneasy whinny. The other riders glanced back, their laughter faltering. "What's the matter with her?" one man asked, reining his chestnut gelding to a halt. "She's stubborn," another muttered. "Knows the stable's near and doesn't want to cross the water." But Elira frowned. She knew her mare well. This was no ordinary stubbornness, no laziness from the day's ride. The animal's sides quivered with a tension she could feel through the saddle. Every muscle in its body was taut, coiled like a bowstring. Its nostrils flared wide as it snorted, ears pinned one moment forward toward the bridge, then jerking back flat against its head the next. The mare whinnied again, sharper this time, the sound carrying across the quiet evening like a cry of alarm. She pawed at the ground, striking sparks from the stones beneath her hooves. Elira tried to calm her with a soothing hand along the neck, whispering the words she always used to quiet nerves. But the horse refused to settle. It tossed its head violently, jerking the reins from her grip, the whites of its eyes flashing in the dim light. The riders exchanged uneasy glances. The bridge loomed larger now, its outline clear against the rushing water. In the silence that followed, even the river seemed louder, its current striking hard against the wooden pylons. A faint creak echoed as the wind shifted through the beams, a sound too low for most to notice, but the mare's ears caught it, twisting toward the noise as if it confirmed her fear. Again she whinnied, a nervous, trembling call that made the hair rise on the back of Alira's neck. This was no mere refusal to cross water. This was something deeper, an instinct older than words, a certainty that danger waited ahead. And though the other riders tried to laugh it off, unease began to settle into their hearts too, carried on the echoes of a horse's cry. The riders slowed as a group, uneasy now. The setting sun had sunk lower, casting long shadows across the valley, and the wooden bridge stood just ahead, its planks dim and dark against the glowing river. The cheerful mood of moments ago had faded into silence, broken only by the rushing of water below and by the sharp cries of Elira's mare. The bay pawed the ground again, harder this time, striking sparks from the stones. Her chest heaved, nostrils flaring wide as she snorted and tossed her head. Then came the sound again, high, piercing, and desperate. A whinny, not once, but again and again, rising in sharp bursts that echoed down the valley. The calls were raw, edged with something primal, something that made the hair stand on the rider's arms. "Easy, girl," Elira whispered, leaning low in the saddle, trying to calm her. Her hands stroked the trembling neck, but the mare's muscles quivered like a bowstring drawn too tight. Each time Elira tried to nudge her forward, the horse balked, jerking back, hooves skidding, neck stretched as though trying to pull free of the reins altogether. The others began to mutter, their voices low and uneasy. "She's spooked, that's all," said one man, though his own voice lacked conviction. "Spooked by what?" Another shot back, his eyes flicking toward the bridge. "Listen to her. She's not just nervous, she's warning." The horse reared slightly, forehooves striking the air, before coming down hard with a loud crack against the earth. Her tail lashed furiously, her eyes rolled white, and her cries grew shriller, carrying urgency no one could mistake. The other horses shifted restlessly too, ears twitching, hooves stamping the ground. A few snorted and tried to turn away, feeding off the bay's agitation. The riders fought to steady them, pulling tight on reins, but unease had taken hold of both man and beast. Elira's mare whinnied once more, the loudest yet, her voice rising like a trumpet call through the evening air. It was no random cry. This was alarm, sharp and unrelenting, impossible to ignore. The valley itself seemed to hush around it, as if listening. The riders sat frozen for a moment, their eyes fixed on the old bridge. The timbers stood silent in the deepening dusk, dark and steady, or so it seemed. Yet the horses' frantic cries clung to their hearts like cold fingers, making them doubt the safety of the road ahead. For the first time, laughter had left them completely. Where once they saw only a bridge, now they felt the weight of unease, carried on the voice of a creature who refused to step forward. The group halted a short distance from the bridge, the fading sunlight glinting off the water below. What had seemed an ordinary crossing just minutes earlier now loomed before them, like a question mark carved into the valley. The bay mare's sharp whinnies still echoed in their ears, each one cutting through the silence like a warning bell. The riders began to murmur, their voices tight, uneasy. "She's just weary from the fair," said one man, adjusting his grip on the reins of his chestnut gelding. He forced a laugh, but it came out brittle. "Any horse will shy after a long road." But another rider shook his head, pointing toward the bridge. "Weary doesn't sound like that. Look, see how the boards bow? The timbers don't sit even anymore. I don't like the look of it." A third rider snorted impatiently, spurring his mare a step forward. "It's an old bridge. It's always creaked. You'd rather waste half the night circling the gorge?" The bay answered with another piercing cry, stamping the ground so hard her hoof left a gouge in the dirt. She tossed her head wildly, eyes rolling white, refusing even to face the bridge. Elira clung tightly to the reins, murmuring to calm her. But the horse quivered beneath her like a string pulled to snapping point. The other mounts grew restless as well. They shifted uneasily, ears flicking back toward the bay's cries, snorting clouds into the cooling air. A few tried to sidestep, tugging against their rider's control. The animals felt the tension in the air, the strange pull of instinct whispering danger. The argument grew louder. It's nonsense. Horses spook at shadows, and sometimes they see what we don't. The river's swollen from the rains. That bridge takes the full weight of the current day after day. If the supports are weakened, then we ride fast and it'll hold. Their words clashed like the rising wind that swept down the gorge. The air carried the scent of damp wood, of moss, and swollen riverbanks. It was heavy, unsettled, and the sound of the water below seemed louder now, thrumming against the pylons like a drumbeat. Elira's mare whinnied again, a long, broken cry that silenced the rider's mid-argument. She backed away a few steps, hooves striking sparks, as she turned half sideways, ears pinned flat, refusing to face the crossing. The riders exchanged glances. Fear flickered in their eyes, unspoken but growing. The bridge loomed ahead, shadowed and still. Yet under the weight of the horses' cries, it no longer looked like the safe, ordinary crossing they had known all their lives. Doubt, sharp and cold, had taken hold. The riders lingered at the edge of the trail, their debate cut short by the mare's unyielding cries. The old bridge loomed just ahead, its silhouette growing darker as the last light of evening bled from the sky. The current below rushed with a heavy, swollen voice, the kind of sound that made the earth itself seem restless. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. The bay mare stood rigid, her flanks quivering, ears pinned back, eyes fixed on the bridge with a terror so deep that even the most skeptical rider could no longer laugh it away. Elira sat frozen in the saddle, feeling her mount's heart pounding beneath her legs, a wild rhythm that told her more than any human words could. Then the wind shifted. A sharp gust funneled through the gorge, rattling the trees and sweeping down across the bridge. The timbers groaned in protest, a long, low moan that set every horse's ears twitching. A second later came the sound no rider could mistake, a deep, splintering crack that echoed like thunder through the valley. All heads snapped toward the bridge. In the middle span, one of the great beams sagged suddenly, splitting under the strain. The boards that rested upon it bowed down, warped, and then snapped clean through. With a deafening crash, a section of planks tumbled into the river, vanishing instantly in the white churn of foam below. The riders gasped, their hearts lurching into their throats. One man's horse reared, nearly throwing him as it shrieked in terror. Another rider yanked hard on the reins, pulling back from the sight of water swallowing wood. For a moment, all they could do was stare. The bridge that had stood for generations now gaped with a jagged wound, broken timber jutting like splintered bones, spray rising where the current smashed against fallen beams. The river carried the debris away swiftly, swallowing what remained. Elira clutched her reins tight, her mare still trembling but standing firm. Her breath came fast, shallow, as she looked from the destroyed section to the quivering horse beneath her. The realization crashed over her as heavily as the river itself. Had the mare not stopped them, they would already have been on that bridge when it gave way. Death had been only steps ahead, and a horse's cry had saved them. The group drew back slowly, the echo of the collapse still ringing in their ears. No one spoke, no one argued. Their faces were pale, eyes wide, their silence more powerful than any words. The truth stood before them in broken wood and roaring water, and in that silence, the bay whinnied once more, not frantic this time, but sharp, almost triumphant, as if to say, "I told you so." For a long moment, the riders did not move. They sat frozen in their saddles, eyes locked on the jagged wound in the bridge, the sound of the river's furious current filling the silence. The water surged below, swallowing the broken timbers and carrying them downstream until they vanished in the twilight. It was as though the river itself had risen to claim the old span, tearing it away before their very eyes. Then, the horses shifted restlessly, breaking the spell. Snorts and pawing hooves snapped the riders back to themselves. A shiver ran through the group, not from the evening chill, but from the realization that gripped them. Had they pressed forward only minutes earlier, they would now be in the river, swept under the crushing current along with the wood. Elira leaned low over her trembling mare, pressing her face into the damp, warm curve of its neck. She whispered softly, voice breaking, "You knew. You saved us." Her fingers tangled in the horse's mane, as tears she hadn't expected stung her eyes. The mare whickered softly, still tense but no longer frantic, as if relieved her warning had been heeded. The others spoke in hushed voices, their tones heavy with awe. "By the saints," one man murmured, his face pale as he wiped sweat and soot from his brow. "We would have all been lost." "I thought she was spooked," admitted another, shaking his head. "But she knew. She felt it before we did." One older rider, his voice rough with years, said what they were all thinking. "We trust our eyes too much. Animals see what we do not." His gaze settled on the bay, who still stood tall despite her trembling flanks. "That horse saved our lives." The group fell into silence again, broken only by the river's roar. They pulled their mounts back from the edge of the gorge, giving the shattered bridge a wide berth. The evening air felt heavier now, the beauty of the sunset drowned by the reminder of how close death had been. Some of the younger riders glanced at Elira with newfound respect, though they knew it was not her, but the horse beneath her who had borne the wisdom. The mare shifted, still restless, but calmer now that the danger had passed. Her dark eyes gleamed in the fading light, watchful, alert, like a sentinel who had done her duty. The riders turned their heads back toward the trail. They would have to take the long route home now, circling the gorge by another road, but no one complained. They were alive. That was enough. As they began to ride away, each of them stole a final glance at the broken bridge, its splintered beams sagging like ribs torn from a body. The sight would haunt them for years, and each time, their minds would return not to the sound of wood collapsing, but to the desperate cries of the bay mare, warnings that had spared them from becoming part of the river's claim. That night, no one doubted her again. Night had fully settled by the time the riders reached the village by the longer path. Lanterns glowed in windows, their warm light spilling onto cobbled streets as neighbors leaned from doorways, waiting for news. The riders dismounted wearily, their voices low and somber as they explained why they had returned so late. When they told the tale, silence fell over the gathering crowd. Faces paled as the villagers imagined the image. The riders crossing the bridge at dusk, the beams snapping beneath them. Horses and men tumbling into the swollen river, some covered their mouths with trembling hands, others shook their heads slowly, unable to speak. And when Elira added that it was her mare's cries that had stopped them in time, every gaze turned toward the bay horse standing quietly at her side. The mare's coat was damp with sweat, streaked with dust from the trail. Her eyes still flicked restlessly, ears twitching as if she half expected danger to return. But she no longer trembled. Instead, she stood with a quiet strength, her head lowered, breathing slow, as though satisfied her warning had been heeded. "She saved you," an elder murmured. "She saved all of you." Whispers spread like fire through the square. Children clutched their mothers' skirts, wide-eyed as they stared at the horse. Farmers and tradesmen alike nodded with reverence. It was not the first time the people had heard of animals sensing danger before humans, but never had they seen it so clearly, so undeniably. In the days that followed, the story grew. Neighbors repeated it at their hearths, how Elira's mare had planted her hooves in the dirt and refused to cross, how her desperate whinnies had echoed across the valley, how the bridge had collapsed moments later into the river's fury. Travelers carried the tale further still, telling it in taverns and markets until it became a story known beyond the village. The old bridge was eventually rebuilt, stronger and safer, but whenever villagers crossed it, they remembered that night. Some would glance down at the river and shiver, imagining what nearly was. Others would pause before the first plank, listening in memory for the sharp, ringing whinnies that had once echoed there. And the bay mare herself was remembered not as stubborn or difficult, but as a guardian. Children grew up hearing the tale, their parents pointing to the broad-shouldered horse, grazing peacefully in Elira's pasture. That one, they would whisper, saved your father's life, saved them all. Elira never forgot the moment she felt the pounding of her mare's heart beneath her saddle, the wild desperation in her cries. She never dismissed an uneasy snort or a nervous stamp of hoof again. In her eyes, the bond between rider and horse had deepened into something sacred, built on trust, not command. So the mare lived out her years not only as a companion, but as a legend in her own time. Her warning had changed the fate of an entire group of riders. Her voice, sharp and unrelenting, had carried louder than reason, louder than doubt. And for as long as the village endured, the story of the evening when a horse's nervous whinnies saved lives was told again and again, reminding all who heard it that sometimes instinct speaks where human sight fails, and that wisdom may come on four hooves and in the cry of an animal who simply refused to be ignored.